Welcome to the third and final episode in this mini-series covering the before, during, and after of a sacred mushroom experience. Integration is the focus today. Eric and Courtney explore what can help us integrate ineffable experience or new realizations into everyday life. Community can make a major contribution here, so share what you've learned in the comments. You're listening to Psilocybin Says. To support it, subscribe on YouTube and podcasts, and stay connected on Instagram and TikTok.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Psilocybin Says. Here we are.
Hey, we are integrating our ideas of integration
Yeah, keep it jovial.
into this episode.
What's happening?
I'm just, we had a fun weekend.
Something the mushrooms told you to do?
What, shake my shoulders?
Yeah, because I don't think I've ever seen that quite ever.
Well,
Actually, I did see that Friday night when we were out dancing.
yeah.
So you're
Sure.
integrating an experience from another.
And physical integration is part of that.
Yeah.
Integrating.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
So we talk about integration a lot, right?
Yeah, so, if those of you who've been listening for the past few weeks, this is the third part in our three-part series of how to navigate psychedelics. I just,
Quote unquote.
Yeah, I know, because, there's no one way to do any of this stuff. We tend to separate it out into these, distinct categories, which they're not. And I admittedly have a chip on my shoulder about whenever things get mainstreamed, and I'm kind of struggling with psychedelics right now, just because they were, fringy for so long, and I usually get attracted to the fringy stuff, and then now it's all mainstream, and the most annoying aspect of that to me is that there are now thousands of psychedelic integration experts. Mm-hmm. And most of those people have very little experience with psychedelics, and integration, in my experience, is just not something that can be clearly defined into this distinct category. And so anyway, I kind of approach this topic sometimes with a little bit of oh, here we go again,
Yeah.
So I want to try to keep that out of it as much as possible, but also expressing that once psychedelics are a normal part of our lives, then integration doesn't require that much, specific focused discussion, because ultimately integration is just good self-care practices. All the stuff that we're going to talk about today, and I listened to a few podcasts kind of preparing for this to hear what others are saying about integration, and some really good stuff out there. Novamind was a good one that I listened to. Excuse me. Some other YouTube videos and stuff. And as I was listening to it, and reflecting on all the stuff that we advise people and all the practices that we utilize ourselves, it's really, all this is just ongoing self-care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which, that term in itself is, I think, quite a bit even more tainted than the term integration.
Just cliched,
Yeah, what does that even mean? I'm going to take
bubble
baths and do face
candles.
masks and schedule a mani-pedi once every 3 weeks.
Eye mask.
So, like you mentioned, integration is really, it's kind of already how we are living already, and then becoming more aware of how we're living, and is an opportunity to implement new things into our life, change our lifestyle a little bit, it's not, integration is not this wrapped up in a pretty little box with a bow conversation. It's complex, and it's personalized, and it's variable, and it's part of this whole wonderful process of having this experience with mushrooms or any other intentional psychedelic practice. It's a wonderful part of it. And it's all like there's this quantum weaving of it is the preparation and it is the experience. And so I think, like, as we talked about on one of our recent episodes, I think that's why a lot of our listeners listen to this, is because we don't generally wrap things up into a pretty little box. We try and then we take a step back and realize, but
because
grain of salt.
we blur all the lines.
Yeah, because that's life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think y'all know listening. We're not going to try and like make this a 10-step, one and done type of conversation, but we have attempted to categorize and organize some like common ways in which we can intentionally reflect on and try new things after a sacrament experience.
Yeah. It's a process. Integration is not, talking to your therapist about your psychedelic experience, where it's not just that.
Definitely can be that, a part of that.
So integration means to make part of a whole, to bring something into a system and make it a part of that whole system. Really, that's a loose definition, but when you look it up, that's kind of what it refers to. And so that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is these experiences that teach us, we're trying to bring them into our lives and make them a part of our whole operating system. And as I was listening to these conversations and reflecting on it, I became really aware of integration is really something that we can do with any experience that is impactful on us, that is educating us or showing us a new perspective. So to take this conversation outside of the psychedelic box, I think might be really helpful to applying the concept across the board, psychedelics and non-psychedelics.
You taking a trip to Disney World? You're gonna need to integrate that. Going to a concert? Probably going to be integrating that for a little while.
Yeah, well, I mean,
when a family reunion.
When you're saying this stuff, I'm trying to think about, like, actually, is that true, or are you just saying it just to be silly? But like,
I'm being serious.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about how, like, you go to a concert. How do you integrate a concert into your daily life? And I mean, I can think of ways. It's coming to me pretty easily. I'm sure I could expand on it more, but
just as the things we're about to talk about.
I mean, one of the main things that I integrate from large communal experiences like concerts and festivals is a broader love for humanity. Going out and seeing people enjoying themselves helps me bring that back into my everyday, where I'm driving down the road and I'm like, yeah, maybe that's the same person who's at that concert, and they're just trying to make the best of their life. So anyway, take it back to psychedelics.
We can extend these experiences in life, whether these impactful experiences in life, with intentional practices. We can, because there is this common experience of going on a vacation or a trip or an adventure and having a big drop in, like, you go on this high of this adventure and then you come back home and here comes your routine, and it's like, it can feel oftentimes like, well, guess I won't have fun until my next adventure, or I won't have this experience until the next time I get to plan something big. But if we have opportunities to intentionally talk about, like, extending that or diving back into that in small ways, then why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah, and I mean, bringing that word into the conversation is perhaps more valuable. Intention, bringing that word into the conversation is perhaps more valuable than into the conversation around the experience, right? That's a lot of times where you hear people talk about your intention. What's your intention in working with the sacrament or psychedelics or whatever? And as we talked about in the last one, a lot of times you set those intentions, you maybe have a specific reason why you're approaching these medicines, or maybe not, but like very often that intention is blown out of the water once you get into the psychedelic space, and the medicine has something else to teach you, perhaps. But in this integration period, intention is extremely powerful, because that's when you are taking these lessons, whatever the lesson that came out of the experience that you could not predict, and then intentionally working with that information in the context of your self-care, self-development practice. So, yeah, I'm just looking forward to this conversation kind of maturing within the psychedelics culture, I guess, is really what I get at when I start thinking about it. So,
and I think it already has a little bit.
For sure.
So, like, what are the different, now that we've kind of set the stage for y'all and our general thoughts about integration, what are the pretty little boxes we can like, get off the shelf and just try and put these?
Well, when we were working on this
into
training material, I did kind of make a few categories of kind of intentional or ways of integrating. I don't know if you want to just kind of refer to that. I don't have them all off the top of my head. It's like 6, I think, categories that we brought up.
So we can just tell y'all what the 6 categories that we've come up with. Eric primarily has really kind of put these into containers for the broader consumption. But those are verbal integration, physical integration, cognitive integration, meditation integration, obedience integration, one of my personal favorites, and community integration, all of which have very valuable parts to each of them. So let's just talk a little bit about each one. So verbal integration.
It's the one everybody knows. I had this trip and here's what I got out of it. Now, the thing about that form of integration is that depending on who you're communicating with and how skillful of a questioner they are, and again, please understand, I'm not knocking therapists at all. But I don't know that you need a therapist for this, or even necessarily an integration expert. You need someone that cares. You need someone that's curious. You need someone who is not going to project their opinions of your experience onto your experience. And I've seen, and so many times, like I said, the other Voyagers there who were just curious, or maybe who had an interesting connection with that person during the trip, be a really powerful part of their clarification, So, like, the reason why this aspect of integration is so valuable is because you come out of these experiences and they're just confusing and distorted, and there's imagery or maybe some seemingly supernatural stuff that happens that you just have no context for. Maybe you're doubting it, did that even happen? And having other people there provide that feedback is a really powerful part of the integration of this, which, solo trips don't allow for that. There's a lot that gets left. I mean, so much gets left on the table from solo tripping because you don't have that third-party feedback. And you had that trip with Amy recently, and hearing you all talk about shared experiences during that experience, like with the dog or whatever it was,
Yeah, huge.
It just supports your understanding that what you experienced was real.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is something that I a big topic outside of the integration conversation, but not necessarily, because discussing and exploring this is a part of the integration, is that the psychedelic space absolutely opens up a window for supernatural, metaphysical oddities, things that happen that just don't normally happen in baseline consciousness. And so, talking about that more as a community and as individuals is a really important part of, I don't want to say this word over and over and over. It's an important part of solidifying those experiences, of knowing that was real. Like when I, with another person, witness an orb floating around in a circle, right? Like if I get to communicate that with somebody and they say, I also saw it too, I was 30 feet away from you and I saw it, and then that adds a validity to my experience. So not only is there, piecing out the experience and kind of understanding, interpreting. We've got someone right now that's coming off the camping retreat who's trying to understand this visual imagery that they got, and they're bringing that conversation into the group. And there's people saying, well, here's what, if you look up the meaning of this imagery, then this is what it often symbolizes or whatever. And so all of these ways that we can kind of help to provide insight and clues for each other into the interpretations and implications of our experience is really important. And then again, I think it is really important to have that external validation of these encounters or experiences that you don't really have a framework for.
Yeah, and I would add, to kind of wrap up this part of integration practice, that communication is, I think, one of the most important things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And it's something that I would love to, in general, as a society, place more emphasis on learning about how to communicate more effectively and more peacefully. And as you mentioned, some really startling things can happen in a sacrament service, and likewise in life. And this is all just like a practice. To me personally, I see practicing with sacred mushrooms as just that, a practice, an opportunity with a wonderful friend and mentor, the mushroom, to gain a different perspective and to be able to practice communicating those insights with the people that I love, just as we do on a day-to-day basis. And as we see, like, in these stigmatized topics like religion and politics and these things that we have stopped talking about in public places out of fear of, like, hurting someone's feelings or saying the wrong thing or being isolated or shunned from our community. These are things that we could do very well to practice doing more of. And the sacrament space is a weird space, really weird oftentimes. And like, life is really freaking weird as well. So we can utilize this opportunity, particularly with other people, like, in my opinion, oftentimes, ideally, if we're in the space with other people, those are the people that it can be really, really helpful to practice communication with.
I just personally think that it's far more important to have verbal integration with the people who you're taking the sacrament or psychedelics with than it is to have those conversations with a therapist necessarily. The therapist has a different role in all this, I feel like. And again, it's not to dismiss one over the other. Just putting some emphasis back on communal support and people who were there with you, feeling the power of the experience, communicating that to each other.
For sure. But having that nonpartisan person when you feel stuck and unable to figure out, how do I communicate this really challenging feeling or idea with this person that I experienced this with? Because sometimes there are things that are hurtful that happen in the sacrament space. Somebody might say something from their own, they're projecting their own stuff onto you. And if you're not familiar with the space, it can feel like, hurtful. And, there's just like various challenging things that can be worked through. So if you don't have much experience in communication skills and practice, then I definitely think it can be really helpful to have a person who is very familiar with communication techniques to help you out.
Yeah, and very familiar with the mushroom space.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So next to verbal is physical integration.
Let's get
shoulder shaking.
So what does this mean besides shaking your shoulders?
It means aligning your chakras.
Whoa. I'm going to go over here and talk about something else. I know the chakras are real too.
It means getting all of your crystals and perfectly aligning them.
I just meditated with my crystal. I did it. And it was great.
Say all this in jest, you know.
Well, halfway, tongue in cheek, you know.
Yeah.
But that's an actual integration for me because I have had such a anti-woo approach for the years, and by golly, I think that there is some magic to crystals, and so mushrooms have helped show me that, and I'm integrating it into my daily life by sometimes meditating with my crystal skull with it.
You know, do you ever feel like you just wish you could record somebody saying something and show it to them like 5 years ago to their past self and just look at their face react?
There's a whole lot of man. Well, that's in a what?
Making this workout sound.
That's integration, is becoming a new person as you integrate the lessons, no matter how strange they might be.
Yeah. All right. So what's physical integration? What is that really? What's
so
what I
was referring to in this was just physical activities that can help you get into a flow state.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily all that it is, but all of these forms of integration kind of can easily bleed into other forms. So, and I kind of keep some of it parceled out, but like for me, it immediately gets blurry because in some of my experiences, I have been instructed to like lift weights more and be more mindful of my physical health. And I don't know that that's necessarily a flow state, but it's a physical activity that is, I'm trying to obey the lessons presented to me by the mushroom. But specifically when I'm talking about physical integration, at least what I try to highlight again is this flow state. Walking, running, like there's just so many things that gardening for me, but then again, this is also bleeds into getting out into nature, which can be another aspect of this as well. So, the deal is, excuse me, at least in my kind of perspective on this, is that we really benefit from having that time where we're not thinking, our bodies are just kind of running on, muscle memory. We're just doing something that keeps our body occupied and we enjoy, but we're not like being pensive. We're just allowing our subconscious to slowly kind of release out. And by doing that, then oftentimes you'll have memories and further understandings coming up from psychedelic experiences or other aspects of life. There's a lot of research around the benefits of just taking like a 20-minute walk a day, especially like midday when you're kind of getting burnt out on all the thinking, problem solving. You set your problems aside and you go do something that is relatively mindless, but also relatively enjoyable. And it's incredible how many wonderful insights and reflections come out of that period. So just more intentionally putting ourselves into physical flow states. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. This is something when I was an athlete growing up, the flow state was like a huge conversation. Like, how do we practice getting into a flow state more? Because that's really where like our best performance happens, and not just athletics. Like I'm sure if you're an entrepreneur or a creative person, like that's where studies have shown that like masterpieces and like you're saying, these great insights and visions come is in these flow states, which there's so many ways to achieve a flow state. You hear about marathon runners talk about getting into like a flow state when they're running, and that's really like the sweet spot that helps them win the race.
Well, love
Have their
making.
best performance. Love making.
Can you get into a flow state in love making?
I did last night.
Absolutely. Yes, you did.
Yeah. So there's lots of ways. Qigong. Did you mention that?
I didn't. That's
Yoga,
that's one of my favorites.
Tai
See,
Chi.
again, this is where the sneak peek obedience integration bleeds into the physical. Because like I was told through my experiences to practice Qigong, and that is a physical flow state. So yes, there's just so many ways, and it's all individual. You got to do what you love. Maybe you like playing golf or baseball or fishing. Something that you do with your body. Gardening for me is a big one.
Yeah, and
Hunting mushrooms. So
there you go.
I mean, like I've had so many hundreds of hours of, intentional integration, walking around looking for mushrooms, connecting dots, and feeling the bigger picture, and
Putting on some music and just
music and dancing,
shaking your
Shoulders.
bootay, playing with your kids, playing hopscotch with your kids. There's like
Oh,
so
man.
many ways
walking
to get
a dog, being with your dog.
move that energy. And like, I mean, that's a big part of the mushroom experience in itself is more and more I've come to realize this. This is something that John Clark, who we just interviewed, and you'll hear his podcast soon. He's a posture coach, and he talks a lot about this being a huge part of the psychedelic experience is the physical practice that can come and becoming aware of and moving energy that is stagnant, and just practicing in that space, becoming more aware of that in itself. And so this may become more apparent to you after you eat mushrooms, is your need to move more. You may not be much of a mover right now, but that happens often with people.
John's story is an incredible story of this physical integration of an experience, man.
It's like the
Yeah. Love that
primo
guy.
story of that. So, all right, moving on. Cognitive integration.
Yeah, this is for the thinkers.
Yeah.
Thinkers.
Put your thinking caps on. It's time for cognitive integration.
I think there is value to deliberately, intentionally setting aside some time, or while you're doing other stuff, to think about, to contemplate the experience, right? You can have this flow state experience where stuff just bubbles up, or you can say, wow, this all happened. How did this happen? How did that timeline unfold? To intentionally take time to reflect on the experience. You're looking at, how did the hours before the experience unfold, and then we dosed, and then the trajectory and what all happened, and then during the experience, while I was experiencing something and this was happening over there, but it seemed like we were connected, or, when I was having these insights, there was something else happening. There are landmarks that you can intentionally walk through to go back into the experience. And again, this is like the same, it's maybe more challenging for some to think about this in the framework of a psychedelic experience, but you can do it with anything. If you go to a concert, you can intentionally think about the specifics that happened. And this is the one that I would suggest not spending a ton of time on, really, right? Maybe contemplating your interpretation, demands or benefits from a little more time spent there than the specifics of like, oh yeah, I saw the, electric dragon, or I saw, all the kind of weird, because a lot of times when you get in these conversations, these verbal integrations, people want to walk back through the specifics of, I saw geometrics, and then I saw this, and then I saw that. And while sometimes that is really valuable, it's really perhaps more valuable to focus on kind of the way that you felt from those encounters, right? And then that can offer insight into interpreting the meaning of the experience.
So is this something that you see, because I do get this kind of twisted with verbal integration, but it sounds like it can be mixed in with verbal integration.
Of course, yeah.
I envision this as being like filling out like a Byron Katie worksheet, like a Judge Your Neighbor worksheet, or like some kind of like,
that could be one.
Like actual putting the, instead of just blah, 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 just like word vomiting out what happened, putting more of a intentional framework and piecing out an experience and looking at it, turning it around, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something you can do. People, I have certainly over in time, journaled my experiences very specifically. This is what I encountered, and kind of documenting the whole thing. I consider that to be a contemplative or cognitive form of integration. And also when you're just talking about the specifics of this is what happened, but just putting thought energy into it, right? Like what does that really mean? What do I take away from that? And for me, one of the most important aspects of that is to continue doing that. I mean, there are experiences that I've had decades ago that I continue to reassess my interpretation of them, and that interpretation changes because of new information that's come to light or whatnot. And I also consider when I am listening to another source of information, like Bashar, listening to Bashar, and he's Bashar, and he's talking about these, weird ass alien races that would have no meaning to me except for the fact that in 2016 I had a mushroom trip that told me all this same stuff. And so when I hear this come from another source, and I intentionally think back to how that trip played out. Started in the garden, and I went through this death experience, and then as I was dying, these beings came to me and told me about my past lives and the blah, 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 and all these different interstellar stuff. And, I've spent quite a bit of time in all these different ways, meditating on it, talking about it, getting into flow states and trying to let it be, intentionally contemplating it, and I mean that in particular, that really happened where hearing this, whatever channeler talk about these, just describing the same thing that I experienced in a mushroom trip 6 years ago. It just gives me food for thought, and we maybe, justifiably so, we have, I think we kind of poo-poo on thinking, we talk about overthinking and just don't think, just feel kind of stuff, and I don't agree with that 100%. I think there is some real value in putting...
You don't need your brain, just completely go brain
when
dead.
we met, I had a little paperweight that said think, and you said to me, like the first
I said, I'm trying to think less because I needed to think a lot less and
I
feel myself a lot more.
Most of us probably do, right? But so I'm just saying, like, in order to adjust our balance, we have focused intentionally more on feeling than thinking over the years. So when I start talking about thinking about my psychedelic experiences, I don't want you saying, oh, just feel them. No, I need to think on them too.
You know.
Keep it jovial. Keep it jovial.
How many times oh, okay. Yeah. Right. I'm just reflecting on all the times you've told me to just like chill out and just
let it go.
Let it go.
Let it
over
go.
The last
I don't know the rest
few
of
months. You're thinking too much, Courtney. Get out of your head.
I'm a hypocrite. What can I say?
All right. So we don't overthink this topic. Let's move on to meditation integration. What does that mean? Meditation.
Again, I think this is where you could have some crossover in contemplative integration or cognitive integration, because when I go into a meditation on an experience, then I will initially start with thinking about the experience and then allowing that to hopefully enter into the feeling space, and then just being with whatever that energy was. That was a big part of my meditating with the crystal a minute ago, is I had this psychedelic experience that just, it was so weird, like I was even before mushrooms, I got this intuition that I was about to get a crystal skull. And then like a month later, I go take mushrooms, and the mushrooms like take me through all this crazy Egyptian history that I had no knowledge of. And then 2 days later, this giant crystal skull was given to me, and there's like the guy that gave it to me is telling me stuff that was told to me in my mushroom trip, and I was like, what the fuck? And so now when I sit and meditate with that, I very often use my original mushroom experience as a touch point, right? To get back into the energy of that experience. And then I try to just open up to that energy, that feeling, and allow a flow state to arise out of it, right? Meditation is another way to get into a flow state. Meditation, through brain scans, we suspect, anyway, I won't say we know, but it seems likely that meditation, deep practiced meditation, is the state that is most similar to a deep psychedelic experience, at least in, how the brain is functioning. You often behave very differently in a psychedelic experience than in meditation. But, this is just another form of self-care that we all would benefit from, is taking 20 minutes or so up to, 2 hours a day.
5 minutes, honestly. Just, I know it's not the same, but like,
right.
If you're like a single mom who's doing it all, and, I'm just saying, it can be like,
it's legit, yeah.
Just 5 minutes.
Yep.
Start your day off before you start doing stuff.
Just little chunks
to
kind
manageable.
of. I like how Abraham Hicks talks about letting the cork float, right? How if we imagine our inner being, I think is how she terms it, as this cork that is floating on water, and it's just coasting through life. It knows where to go. It's just good. Like, it's all good. And our thoughts and worries and all the stuff that we pile on is just like holding this cork down. And when we meditate, if we can just clear our mind, relax our mind, then that cork will just float to the surface again. And that's what I feel like when I was over there meditating for 20 minutes. I just feel like I'm just kind of like, my real self is like able to just kind of be without all the shoulds and woulds and all that kind of stuff. So it's just a way to get into a flow state and to allow the subconscious to continue to express itself.
I don't know about that, because I just lead meditations. I don't actually do them.
Well, this is a good point to bring up, because it's actually a different form of meditation. The guided meditation isn't guided meditations are great, and you do great guided meditations. Mine are so-so. There's some great ones online. Bashar's are fucking rocking, if you want a good guided meditation.
Feel the vibration.
I don't know about that one. Like, you played me the weirdest Bashar meditation Yeah, the first time. I ain't stop you. And
It's still really good.
Nobody's gonna go listen to Bashar after you.
Well, what are you trying to sell people on Bashar? Are you some kind of Bashar salesman?
Man, Bashar's pretty.
If you want to listen to Bashar, go listen to Bashar. If you don't, then don't.
Get ready for some weird shit though, with some truth too. So anyway,
I love Bashar's
the guided meditations are really valuable. I don't know that they allow for as much flow or kind of subconscious stuff to come out.
It's more of a cognitive.
Now, there are
experience.
guided meditations. Some of the ones that I've really enjoyed are those guided meditations of self-discovery where you like go into a cave and in the cave there's a box and in the box is your, inner being or whatever you want to call it, or your inner child. And so that I like that kind of stuff because it does open up for and basically you are just going to hear what Eric likes. You could
those are the meditations I lead.
Yeah, you do
adventure
good.
meditations.
You do adventure meditations.
Yeah.
Whoa.
My cosmic consciousness meditation. Do I have that one on one of our playlists? I don't know, but I get lots of good feedback on that one.
Maybe put that on a playlist and get other people to hear it.
I know.
So
I'm trying to think how I really like to sit with. It's like it's really challenging for most people to sit and be
which is
still,
exactly why we should be doing it more.
Which is the point.
No.
So I'm certainly in a stuck place with it. I used to do like 1 to 2 hour sitting meditations before we met. Like regularly I was doing those. And then when we met, still I was getting up at like 5 a.m. with the sunrise and had a whole ceremony, and it was just astounding. Beautiful, wonderful. Felt like I was floating all day almost when I was doing that. So I'd like to get back into it. It's definitely a different level when you have little kids and when you're a mom in particular and the kids are like attached to you and they wake up. Like the earlier you wake up, the earlier they wake up. It's like something special.
Back then you just had stepkids and you're like, that's Eric. Eric's got that.
Well,
help! Somebody wipe my butt! You're like, yep, ain't my baby.
I made a lot of breakfast sandwiches in the morning, okay? Did a lot of transportation.
I'm sure you did.
But it was a whole different ball game. That's for sure.
You did a lot of integration while you were making those breakfast sandwiches. And
I did, yeah. Being a stepmom.
It's something. Step parents, boy, it's hard work. It's really hard work. I think it's harder than parenting if you're a good step parent. Anyway,
that's a different podcast.
Parenting integration, parental integration. That's shit. Hey,
comment below
my
on
kids,
all the forms of integration we do not talk about.
Yeah. Agricultural integration. Farming. No, seriously, my kids have been a massive integration tool for me to put into practice the lessons that are coming at me from mushrooms. Our kids, the kids.
The kids. All right, let's move on to obedience integration.
But I wanted to talk about meditation anyway.
Did you?
Not really. I did want to say that like the subject of meditation is, I believe, comparable to the subject of integration because it's another one of these kind of cliched things that we seem to, like we've now turned meditation into like, just take 3 minutes a day to be mindful, right? Like, is that really meditation? Is that like?
It's relative.
It's relative, but it's kind of like yoga, and that's where I feel like psychedelics and the integration of psychedelics is kind of taken on.
Yeah, it's microdosing versus macrodosing.
Right, it's kind of,
for sure.
Yeah, so
a whole different
I'm not a purist
spectrum.
But like there's, I don't know, it's just tricky. I'm a judgmental asshole.
Depends on what you're going for. You're gonna cut bread out of your diet, or you're gonna fast? Because you're gonna get very different experiences.
And the hope is that it's an incremental step towards a deeper practice.
Yeah.
Right. So if all you can do is meditate for 3 minutes a day, some people might not call that meditation, but start there. You might find benefit there. If you find 3 minutes challenging, then you definitely need 30 minutes. And I'm speaking for myself, and it's something that we all would do well to just take time to silence ourselves, allow our real inner voice to rise up, and then take that self out into the world.
Align with your highest frequencies. I'm keeping the energy up. What?
Courtney and I had a really fun weekend. We celebrated her birthday, which was a bit of an integration practice as well.
It was. There's a lot of physical integration and yes. And anything else?
Moving on.
There was some verbal integration. Not much obedience integration.
Obedience. Well, I don't know if that's
there
true
was
either.
Community integration.
So before we go to that, let's talk about this obedience thing.
A little sneak peek. Okay. All right, let's go. Obedient.
Well, we all know the mushroom can be something of a dominatrix.
That's right. Yeah, the non-binary mushroom being is
So
a freak.
I think that the reason that people respond well to this when we bring it up in sanctuary and the trainings and whatnot is because it's not really talked about. I don't know if anywhere that I've heard this really directly spoken to, and that is doing what the mushrooms tell you to do. Those of you who have taken mushrooms a handful of times know that at some point or another, the mushroom's going to lay down the law. They're just going to tell you, hey, look, you're fucking up. You need to do this different. You need to do this better. You need to change some things about your experience. And that can be really hard to hear. And it can be even harder to implement, particularly if you're having a solo experience and there's no one else that is even that you talk about these things with, because it requires accountability. You know, there were many, many years, and there still are times when the mushrooms tell me to do something and I know that I should do it. And boy, I'm just not there yet. I just don't have the discipline. I'm just don't have it. But I noticed that when I share these teachings, these instructions from the mushroom with you or other members of my community, that I am much more likely to implement these changes. I
just had a thought about what someone in our membership community who commented in Discord yesterday and mentioned that they'd gotten a big headache after a mushroom experience. And they're going to talk about it on our ongoing ministry calls. But it brought up for me those times where the mushroom has been like, all right, let's talk. It's time to talk about this. And it's been like those experiences that are really intense and present me with things I've been avoiding looking at. Like the following day, like those are the times when I've gotten like massive headaches. And like, because it's felt to me like this resistance, just like, oh, like I'm like this clenching in my energetic field that is being like almost like a massage, getting like relaxed and worked out, and just a lot of release that can be intense to manage physically. But yeah, what you said about like sometimes it can feel like when we have those experiences of, all right, here's what's going on. You haven't been like being aware, paying attention, or putting into practice these things. You know, you'd feel better. Your life would be better if you did. Sometimes it feels like we got to do those things all at once. And like, oh my God, I've got to quit my job tomorrow. Like, oh my God, like now I've got to leave my spouse tomorrow and my whole life behind. I'm doing it all wrong. And so like obedience integration, that doesn't necessarily mean like you're being told to do all these things or that's how you perceive it. So you got to do them now.
Right.
That's not what
No.
we're communicating, to be clear.
No. But when the mushroom tells you to leave your job or, something about a relationship, you need to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
You need to explore that. What are the options? Explore it with someone else who is impartial, someone that's not trying to get you to do what they want you to do.
Someone who's not wrapped up in the situation.
Maybe I wonder if you want to talk about that one experience where you had that you were living with someone. Can we talk about that whole thing? People would love to hear that story. It was wild, that whole trip, the raccoons and all that. Do we have time for that?
I mean, we're at 20.
Yeah, but if we do a 90-minute...
I think just like a real quick synopsis of that would be maybe appropriate.
God, yeah, it's hard to do it justice real quick though. Can I go? I'll go real fast.
Okay.
All right, so we're out. Courtney and I are tripping by ourselves, out on the farm. We're up on the hill, surrounded by all this acreage. We got a little hut behind us that I built, and a little fire there. And as we're going into the mushroom space, I can see like Courtney's starting to get uncomfortable. There was some stuff that you had said. I forget exactly what it was, but then basically fast forward, you're sitting down, and as you're sitting there, I'm watching you go into this kind of like, looked like this slumped kind of fearful state. And then, like as that happened, we heard way off in the distance, we heard a raccoon. Like this is like 9, 10 o'clock at night. We hear a raccoon like, and you just like, thanks. Yeah, you just immediately, as soon as that first raccoon noise way off in the distance, you immediately looked up in fear and you said, "What's that?" And I don't even think it was me that said this. It just came out of my mouth. "They're coming for you." and you were like, "What?" And then, like, out in the distance, all these raccoons from all around out in the woods started making all this noise, and we could hear them, and they were getting closer and closer, and they were encircling us. And so these raccoons encircled us, probably like a dozen at least, just making all this noise, hissing and all this stuff. And I like ran them off, yelled at them and ran them off or whatever. And you were like, "What the fuck is going on?" And I was like, I don't know what's happening. And then I would see you go through this, like, into this, like, confident posture and, like, just strong and determined. And you would do that, and the horses out in the field would be like, I watched this cycle repeat 3 times. The raccoons come in, you would go into this slumping, fearful state, and the raccoons would come in. I would run them off, and then you would go through this period of confidence, and the horses would make all this noise. And that happened 3 times over the course of about an hour and a half.
These are the benefits of not tripping with a playlist. Just saying.
And having somebody else there with you, because we talked about this for years, and it happened. Undeniably, it happened. I mean, it was like, I felt like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings.
Even the fire was responding.
The fire was, I had that staff, and I was just like, dude, it was wicked wild. So anyway, we go through this whole experience, and then at the end of it, Courtney's like, we're talking about like, what the fuck just happened? And you were like, "Oh my God, my roommate has a raccoon in the freezer." And then you're like, "I don't know, the situation, she's got books in the freezer and raccoons in the freezer. This house is haunted that we're living in. Like, this is all bad. I gotta get out. I gotta get the fuck out of this situation. This is bad, 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 bad." And then you're like, the next day, Courtney goes back to that place, and when she opens the door to go in the house, a live raccoon falls out of the soffit right in front of her. But the message of that trip was, get away from this situation. This is an unhealthy, or at least that's how we interpreted it at that time, was you're in an unhealthy place.
At the time I interpreted it as a like major warning to GTFO.
Yeah.
I was terrified.
Yeah.
I was actually terrified to step foot in the building, and I was shaking like really intensely. Like I was really scared.
Then
I went in to get my stuff and I ran out, and I was intending to like spend the night and be in my room, and I could not do it. I was terrified to be there. And I conveyed all of this to the person, the housemate who owned the home, that the whole trip, I explained it to her, and I told her, like, I feel like I'm being told to leave and I'm scared and I need you to know. Like, I feel like communicating this to you is a big part of why I had that experience. And she overall received it well, but I'm not sure how many changes she made, but, and I love her dearly to this day.
Mm-hmm.
She's just, very unique personality. But for me, looking back, as time went on and I gravitated away from that environment, I mean, relatively quickly, I got my stuff out. Actually, it was within like 4 weeks. I was like, bye.
Yeah, I don't know if you even stayed there. Did you even
Actually,
stay
did
there?
not. I think I tried to stay there one night, and I lasted until like 1 a.m, and I left in the middle of the night, and I never went back for the night. Yeah, it was a legitimately intense, energetically heavy environment. But looking back on that, I see it now as a wake-up call for me to be aware of boundaries and having boundaries in my life and setting boundaries for myself. And just having that conversation with that person was monumental for me. The fact that I'd never confronted someone like that about the space that they were keeping, and that was huge.
Would you do it differently looking back?
Would I do it differently?
What would you do differently, if anything?
I would probably not. Now I would not be so afraid. Because I was even afraid to talk with her. I felt it's one of those things when people talk about good and evil, and the more that we feed this idea of evil, the more evil thoughts we begin to have, quote unquote evil, like really dark, like, stay away from me, like salts in a circle, like I'm, like that kind of energy is how I responded back then. Right. And now, or when I've had mushroom experiences in the past 5 years, I've started to see that there's wake-up calls in life, and they're an opportunity for growth. And people, I believe, at their core are not evil. Like at our core, all of us are made of the same. And we have these opportunities in our life to have communications. And this is what we're here for, is to have these experiences with other people. And so seeing it more back then, like if it were me, then I would approach it with more of a gentleness with myself and her, mainly with myself, because I felt as if I was completely naive. I was really hard on myself for even getting in that situation, and it manifested in just tension. I mean, I was clenched for weeks after that, feeling like I had really done some damage in my life, and I was just really hard on myself. So I would probably talk to some friends about it, today, and ask, what are your thoughts about this? How should I navigate this? And, not feel like I've got to make these big, radical, urgent moves immediately.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the most important thing to bring up in this, because, it can be easy coming out of these shocking experiences to say, oh my God, I've got to get away from this situation. But burning bridges,
right. It makes it
very
harder to, it's like digging a deeper hole to act
Absolutely.
reactively, because life just doesn't generally work like that. I mean, in reality, like, yes, it can seem like that, but these things are accumulating over time. These lessons are not overnight lessons. These are things that have been building up over a period of time, and integrating these experiences happen over a period of time, no matter what.
You know, I mean, I still feel like the main cause of us, or of being arrested, I still feel like it had a lot to do with me not doing what the mushrooms said in terms of getting my cannabis use under control. Because I was 35 at that time. I had been smoking cannabis every single day, like nonstop every day, for about, at 35, about 15 years. When I was 20, I just started, they put me on Zoloft. I was like, nope. And just started using cannabis all day, every day, and past the point where it was useful, and mushrooms would tell me very frequently to get it under control. You know, I never had to quit. Like, it was never like, stop. It was always like, just, you know, put the brakes on, man. And I wouldn't. And that was the first time that I stopped using cannabis in 15 years, was when we were arrested for those 2.5 years that we were on probation. And as soon as the thing happened that led to that, it was like, because we were tripping when it happened, you know, and it's like, this is what happens when you don't listen to the mushroom. And I was like, it was fun. I'm curious about yourself, though. What have you ever experiences where, you know, you've been instructed to do a certain thing and you did not obey, and how did that turn out from the mushroom?
What comes up most for me is, again, this boundaries kind of instruction to, or being shown where I'm not standing up for myself in my life, and letting that go after having the experience, feeling like, like that was intense. I don't think I'm ready to look at that for a while, and not doing it. And then something else happens, like in our relationship, that is really painful and is a result of me not communicating my needs and actually following through with those communications. Like, you know, I said this, these are my needs, they're not being met, and then letting it go. Like, oh, well, guess my needs don't matter. And being shown that in the mushroom space, where I'm suffering and feeling like, you need to communicate these things.
And what happens when you don't?
Well, my needs continue to not be met.
But does it like get worse? Does the problem get deeper, or have you felt that way, or is it just kind of?
Yeah, definitely gets worse. It's compiling like a hoarder almost. It's like a similar thing. You don't listen to clean up. You don't clean up or be aware of, you know, not accumulating things, like saying no. I don't know. Actually, that doesn't bring me joy in my life. When we don't do that, then we keep inviting in things that just, they're crap. They mean very little to us. Then we end up in a space, an energetic space full of crap, that it gets harder and harder and harder to clean. It takes more energy to clean it up. And so, yeah, just more situations that are deeper in, like continuing to get deeper involved in other relationships and scenarios that are just like, oh my gosh, this is getting worse. I'm more out of alignment now than I was before.
I would almost say across the board, you know, all the people I've worked with, those who have benefited the most are the ones who have followed the instruction. They've obeyed the mushroom. immediately, our good friend Laura comes to mind. I won't go into specifics of her story or identify her, but she's someone that in our community knows has really implemented the changes. That doesn't mean that everything's going to go easy, because anytime you implement some significant changes in your life, then there's going to be pushback, there's going to be hurdles that come up. But by sticking to what you know is right, eventually you will get to the outcome that you desire. So,
And
I've also, just real quick, I'll just say that I've also, finally, you're cutting me off. Yeah, good job.
thanks. It's part of my obedience integration.
That I have also seen many times and experienced my own self at times not doing what the mushrooms told me to do, or my higher self, or whatever it is communicating to us, and seeing the detriment that brings into my experience.
Yeah, and this isn't, again, black and white.
Right.
This sounds like when I hear you say obeying the mushroom, I mean, there can come with a very like martyrdom type of vibe to it.
Whoa.
And I see it more if you think of it in terms of, because I think of the mushroom as a mentor, like someone that I have partnered with, knowing they have a lot more experience than me in a certain realm. And I'm asking for feedback. I'm asking for support and perspective. And it's like when we hire a financial advisor and they're like, hey, if you would balance your checkbook once a month, you probably wouldn't find yourself in this situation. And you're like, yeah, no, I hired you to tell me some things, but probably not going to do that. Never mind. Like, I don't want to take your advice. Like, it's kind of, for me, I see it more kind of in that kind of terminology instead of, I don't know. I'm pointing that out because it is kind of an intense term to like.
Yeah, but as you
obey,
know, like, you get in these experiences and they will sometimes pin you down and tell you, like, look, you better change or this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so it is a strong word, and there's maybe a better or a different word that could be used to communicate that nuance. But
yeah, because I do feel like that is part of what, when I look back at that experience we just talked about with the raccoons and my housemate, that kind of language was part of what I would not bring into another experience like that. Feeling this like really heavy urgency that was not, I don't in retrospect feel that was helpful for me. So I'm just trying to like keep it like in balance and flow when we talk about being shown things. Like we can bring lightness, and that is, I feel like, a big part of this whole the whole thing, the whole experience that the mushroom can show us is like, it's the way in which we do things oftentimes that can make all the difference.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that the way that we obey is really important. But the way that the mushroom communicates, all the way back to our knowledge anyway with Maria Sabina, you've seen those instances that, like, Maria Sabina herself, like, the spirit is speaking through her and she's like, you have to change your life. Because we, like Bruce Lipton talks about this, and in other places, the reality that we very often need those powerful emotional shakeups to make the change, right? And so when I think about obedience, I think about, cause and effect. Like, if I tell my kid to like obey my instruction, it's for their own good. Or my dog, if I take my dog for obedience training, then like it's to help the animal. It's not. I know that we do have a context around obey that like comes from this like legalism, and you think about just like the punitive punishment coming down all the time. But there's a reality too, like it's like it's this or that. You do get a choice which one, but if you choose the unhealthy option, then you're going to continue to experience more and more unhealthy outcomes. So I'm certainly open to augmenting the language. But for me right now, I guess because I was raised in such a legalistic family where it was like obey, that's where I'm at right now. But anyway, we'll move on from here. We can come out with some different language. We'll keep it jovial.
Jovial. I love you.
Yeah, you do.
All right.
All right, my favorite one, really, where this is really all about, and all of this can ultimately, I think, be lumped up under community integration, because all of this stuff that we've just talked about can most effectively take place within the context of community. I don't care if that's, like, say, if it's a physical integration, or if it's contemplative, or if it's, verbal, talking with your community, getting out and playing some tennis, or going for a walk in the park, or physical activities with someone in your community that, as ideas come up, maybe you can reflect on. Of course, there's value in doing all those things by yourself. I don't say you always have to be with people, but for goodness sakes, we are tribal, and yet we live in mini boxes, like MINI boxes, and very seldomly even know the person that's living in the miniature box next to us. So psychedelic work overall is still being placed in this clinical box where you go have a psychedelic experience under the care of 2 trained facilitators, and it's a personal, private experience that you then integrate with your therapist. That method has utility, but I will promise you, it's not even something that I know. It's something that humans have known for millennia, that these experiences are most effective in the community context. And the integration of these experiences is most effective in community context, particularly because of the accountability and the feedback that we get from each other.
Yeah, and the appreciation that we get from each other.
Amen.
That's huge. It's so huge. Reflecting on our last camping retreat and seeing all these people who have been most of them getting to know each other for the past year plus via Zoom calls and various contexts, and over messaging threads, and like hearing all the ins and outs of like what people are experiencing, and then coming together, and like it's just this, it's so rich. It's like you've heard of the community soup stone. It's like
what the fuck are you talking about?
I'm just feeling very
community soup stone.
I'm just feeling very 1800s today.
You are definitely.
The soup stone. It's a seasoning stone that gets passed around in the community. Like you use it in your soup.
No, I don't know this. My community has never had a stone for our soup.
It's a stone, and you put it in your stew, and then you clean it off and pass it around, but it seasons all the other. It's totally sterile.
Stephen, Nancy, are you listening? Where was our stone in the soup
we
for
need to
our
get one.
retreat?
We have
a stone that, from retreat to retreat, we've passed this stone down for generations.
Yeah, yes, that's a thing. Look it up.
My grandpa's carrots. Okay, cool.
Your community has a flavor in a stone.
Okay.
Well, that's how I see, in a way, our community. It's like building up over time. It's this like rich, like scrapbook that has so many stories, and like it comes together, and it's in a group context. Like you can pull all these pieces out. You're forming a web like that is connecting all these dots that can only happen with other people over time.
Right.
You can only connect the dots with like a team. You think of like a detective and its team, like you have to get to know each other's personalities.
A detective
I've
and
got
his
lots
team?
of metaphors.
What? Are they eating soup stones?
The detective team has a soup stone.
So one of the examples that I've seen in the last 2 days of something real versus something out of the 1800s or Sherlock Holmes or some shit is what's going on with our most recent camping retreat members. Right?
Yeah.
So we had our integration call afterwards and talking about experience and catching up and everything. And of those 16 people, I don't know, probably 14 of 16 have already independently scheduled another Zoom call to all talk to each other without me being involved. Right? I mean, I may at some point get back involved or whatever in these conversations, but that is such a beautiful living example of what community integration looks like. And it's impossible for me to overstate this because right now, psychedelic therapy, psychedelics are being spoken of again as this isolated individual experience. And that's just not the best approach. It's not the safest approach. It's not the most effective approach. It's not how it's been done by our ancestors, and it's not how we're going to be doing this in the future as this continues to unfold. So I just kind of want to bring people along quicker, put all that as much as you can aside. Yes, some people will benefit from a solo experience, especially if there's some really deep trauma work. But even that, how many times have we seen people identify with others who have suffered from, the same kind of sexual abuse or whatever it might be?
Yeah.
And so to have that reflection of your community member to look at you and say, I have been there, I know your pain, and we can get through this together is incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah. Isn't this kind of like a similar concept as getting married in front of your community, with your community, like saying your vows to your life partner in front of all these people that have been and you expect to be in your life, because you're being witnessed, and it's that just magnifies any experience is the knowing that you're participating with others who are having their own perception and their own memory being formed. And so as we continue to come together with each other, it's like, yeah, I remember that time when I told this person that I was going to do this thing, and you remember that. I know you remember that. So as I go through this other situation, you have this memory of me doing this powerful thing, and you can remind me of that, and that informs how you share your opinion with me. And
even if it's not directly spoken to, there's a knowing.
Yeah.
I know that you know.
Yeah.
That I know I need to do something differently.
Yeah.
Or that I need to process something or whatever. So the accountability, the container of support that it creates, the ongoing, because again, you're going to be integrating these experiences probably for the rest of your life. That's another challenge that I have with this conversation around integrations, because we talk about it like, okay, well, you've integrated your psychedelic experience. Are you ready for your next one? Or don't have your next experience until you've fully integrated your first experience. Like, you're going to be integrating these experiences for the rest of your fucking life. And to have a community to do that in is so powerful. And I think that's why we don't hear, to my knowledge, we don't hear traditional cultures who are still practicing psychedelic, whatever, shamanism or religion. There's not this huge emphasis on integration, because it's already integrated into their lives. And then this whole topic of, not having another psychedelic experience until you've integrated your previous one. There are ayahuasca communities that every single weekend the same people get together and take ayahuasca, and it's not considered experience chasing. It's not considered whatever misuse or however we often speak about that practice. Like if I was to take mushrooms every weekend, like I have in the past, there would be people who are saying, are you giving enough time to integrate your experiences? Well, after a certain point, when psychedelics are an integrated part of your life, then the psychedelic experience is also another way to integrate past experiences. So this conversation just doesn't fit in a nice little box. And hopefully this will, for some people, this will give a broader perspective, just a different perspective on integration. There's tons of great information out there, and there's so much truth. There's the kind of basic way of integrating an experience through talk therapy and all that has value, but it just doesn't end there. And hopefully we've communicated that well.
Yeah.
And in a jovial manner.
I feel like our intention was fulfilled.
I'm really excited about our next podcast, our 100th episode.
Oh yeah, hey,
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
We should talk about podcast integration.
We integrate. We'll probably integrate this later.
We didn't talk about food integration.
Yeah, I'm still integrating the chocolate bar I ate for breakfast.
Yeah. Anyway, there's so much here. Anyway, thank you all for listening. This is always so wonderful sitting down with my wife when she takes the time to communicate.
Love you.
Love you too.
Yeah. Comment below. Comment below if you're watching on YouTube. Comment below and let us know how you like to integrate things. And if you like my shoulder dance. Okay, that's all. See you on the 100th episode.
Yay.